everyone. Firstly, I'm going to say I'm actually in complete shock that people showed up. So thank you so much. I didn't think there'd be such a response for this. So my presentation is called Data Tells Me You're Lonely. And basically it's about how we can use technology to build communities and mitigate loneliness. The reason why I wanted to bring this to an event like Big Data London is because, yes, this is about data and this is about big data and it's about analytics, but ultimately a lot of the time these technology conferences and technology industries and corporates, they forget that we are firstly human beings who have feelings and need a sense of community, need emotion, and really need to progress in a space where we feel as if we belong. Just a little bit about me, just to set the scene and the context as to why this presentation has come about. So I graduated in 2015, and since graduating I worked in technology. So I've worked in companies that do big data, analytics, marketing, and moved over to consultancy and then fintech consultancy. More times than not, in all companies, I have been the only woman or the only woman of color. And more times than not, I've been in positions where I have been very much disregarded as either the manager or someone who's leading the team. Now, I see a few nods here. And it doesn't matter what gender you are, I think we've all been in situations where not everyone believes that we are capable. I then went on to discover myself transitioning from quite a confident and well put together employee to someone who felt quite isolated and lonely in the workplace. That's because I didn't feel like I personally had a sense of community, and most importantly, I didn't have anyone that I could go to and be like, hey, so someone made a passive-aggressive comment, how do I react? Or my manager, well, I want to talk to her about negotiation and salary. How do I talk to her when there's no one really to guide you as a role model or as a figure who can be somewhat of an advisor? And so I created Like-Minded Females. Like-Minded Females is an online community, and we do offline events. We started off with a brunch last May. Ironically, no one showed up to the brunch. So I know everyone giggles when I say that, but actually I just sat there crying. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I thought someone would have showed up. But again, when I went back to understand why they didn't show up, it's because I had my own biases. I thought that a sense of community only was important for young professionals or those that had graduated. I thought that only young people and only millennials were facing these issues in the workplace, and I was 100% wrong. And so 18 months later, we have grown to a social online community of over 9,000. We've socially engaged and interacted with over 12,000 people online and offline. And as of a month ago, I have now handed in my notice for my day job and taken this into a business. But the ethos and the ethics behind it and the values are the same. It's about using technology to drive emotion, to focus on what people really want and how we can progress their life skills, rather than just focusing on, are you technical, are you non-technical all the time? Like, personally, I find that question quite boring now, because that's more or less the second thing that you'll hear when you go to these kind of events. From that, I've been able to become a D&I expert, which very simply means that I am now helping corporates, businesses, and communities to understand how they can diversify their workforce, but not just diversify their workforce, create an inclusive culture which focuses on mental health, which focuses on mental well-being, on cultural awareness, on burnout, and all the buzzwords and yet the truths that we're all currently facing. And then through that, I was asked to do a TED talk, to which I really couldn't say no. So that one is very self-explanatory. That comes out next year. Now, who here remembers MSN Messenger? That's most of us. MSN Messenger was the first time I'd ever really been allowed to use technology and really found a sense of both friendship and community online. So this is a chat which I, for some reason, had saved in my emails and I found whilst I was creating this presentation. So obviously, looking at this chat, I'm very embarrassed about what my status was and the kind of grammar I used whilst I was at MSN. But the point being is that I remember being a secondary school kid, running home, and as soon as I got home, changing my clothes, having a shower, and the first thing I did was I jump on MSN Messenger because I wanted to talk to everyone around me, see what they were doing. But it wasn't just you spoke to people you knew, it was you spoke to friends of friends of friends who you might meet up with in a library or you might have something in common with. And who remembers at that point having to scan your picture in the scanner for it to become your profile picture? No? Okay, well, I didn't have an adapter, I think. So for me, it was before the time where my phone connected to my computer. So I'd have to take a picture of myself and print it, then scan it back into the computer, crop it on Paint, do something like funky on it, and make it my profile picture. Whereas today, it's far easier. You take a picture, you have an iPhone or a Huawei or a Samsung, and you just upload it on LinkedIn. But the reason why I bring MSN Messenger up is because that was the first time that I felt like I remember having a sense of community through the use of technology. Tech was used for social good, or in my mind, it was used to talk to people, to find a sense of commonality, and to very much discuss what had happened day in and day out. And then ask the other person how they've dealt with it, so that maybe you could deal with it in a different way. 53% of the global population are online. However, 53% of the global population are online, 90% of the UK population are online, and yet the stats, the most recent stats, suggest that 1 in 5 of us suffer from loneliness. Now I just want you to pause and think for a minute. How can we be online and be connected and be interactive and be able to now discuss, talk and communicate with someone halfway across the world, and yet we feel even more lonelier than before? 1 in 5 of us are lonely. 1 in 7 of us suffer from mental health issues in relation to loneliness. Those were the most recent stats via the Mind charity, I believe it was. 1 in 7 suffer from mental health issues. Mental health issues can be anything from lack of wellness to burnout to feeling like you're stressed, but also not knowing how to bring up conversations like shared parental leave. Or, what if I don't want a family, but I want flexible working hours? Where does that question come? Now, the concept of loneliness and being lonely is often not one that I've just struggled with, but one that when I discuss with the elder community in typically an ethnic background, they kind of think, well, how can you be lonely when there's so many people around you? How can you possibly be lonely when all you do is you're on your phone every day? Who are you talking to? Why? Are you posting pictures on Instagram or Facebook and LinkedIn and then coming back to tell me that you're lonely and you're suffering from mental health? But to that I reply that we're not educated enough on really understanding what that truly means. So when you look into the factors of loneliness, and there's been ample studies that have now been conducted on loneliness, they break it down into 3 different areas. 1, it's the disconnect between what you want, what reality is, and what you feel you should be having. 2, it's the emotions that then occur when you think something should go a certain way and it doesn't. But 3, it's how you handle that occurrence. It's how you handle those situations, and it's how you mentally expect something to have a outcome or a favorable outcome, and in that moment it does not. So loneliness is a feeling which we feel when we already come with expectations, and yet we leave with something being quite off and not exactly what we wanted. Cool. And so I bring us back to like-minded females. So for all the men in the room and those who don't identify as female, 30% of our engaged audience are actually non-female. So we are inclusive, though we do stick with pink colours. So for that I apologise. I tried to change the branding, but honestly our market really likes it. But like-minded females started very much, like I mentioned, with a brunch idea. the motive behind it was I felt very lonely, I felt disconnected, and I felt like I didn't really have the same society I did when I was 15 years old and jumping on MSN. And so I thought, do you know what will solve it? Is by creating a LinkedIn group and by creating our first brunch. Like I mentioned, no one showed up to the first brunch. I sat there in tears. But most importantly, it taught me the importance of being resilient and going back and asking those 12 people who had initially signed up to say, why didn't you attend? And do you know what they responded with? Because we didn't have the confidence. Because we didn't know that someone else would show up. Because we weren't sure that we were going to enjoy what we were coming for. And so we took a step back. I very much assessed what we were offering. And so now we are an online community to empower, to connect, and to celebrate individualism. We ensure we provide a safe space, the same similar safe space that you would have felt when you were using technology as a kid, where you could have asked any and every question to the person who you were communicating with. We share stories, we exchange narratives, and very much we connect. And now we've taken that offline, where we now are a diversity inclusion initiative, which is changing the narrative of inclusion by also helping corporates and businesses understand how they can create communities internally rather than us having to go outside and seek them for ourselves. This is a very quick exercise I'd like you to do and self-reflect on your own. So there's been studies which talk about social belonging, and the scale of social belonging often ties with the concept of loneliness. And they say that if you feel like you don't have the answer to these questions, that you don't therefore socially belong. So the questions go like this, and I'd like you to just self-reflect and answer them in your own mind. There's no need to share. But first question, do you have friends? Second question, do you feel like if you went through something dramatic or traumatic, you would know who to go to? Third question, do you feel like you are using the technology around you for the best purpose that you can? Now, this was an actual study conducted. The questions I've tweaked slightly for this conversation, but this was actually a study conducted, I believe it was in the Americas, where they've now started looking into what creates loneliness, and through examining thousands of our participants, through their data, they've understood that loneliness is a spectrum, and a spectrum which many of us feel most of the time that can be very much collated into a scale of 1 to 5. Who here has heard of Maslow? I think nearly everyone, because that's like one of the first things you're ever taught, I think, in university or school, is Maslow and the need to belong. Again, being a part of the community or a community is because you feel like you need to belong, and you feel like you have a lack of belonging. That's where it stems from. But when Maslow created his hierarchy, he created it with the intent that first you have psychological barriers that you have to face, overcome, and meet. And then that grows to safety, belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization. But when you look at the global population and the stats that are out there, so the data that's backing up what I'm currently saying, you realize that most of us stop at love and belonging and don't necessarily know how to push past it, because we don't actually think that we are capable or surrounded by love or belong. Oh, sorry, my PowerPoint's going crazy. One of my issues with Maslow's hierarchy is that personally I don't think it's relevant to the 21st century and to 2019. Why? Because Maslow's hierarchy doesn't include technology. Maslow's hierarchy doesn't use a concept where he thought that we would be connected through the means of social media, social technology, or a small device in our hand. Maslow's hierarchy also suggests that for you to belong, you are alone, and that you're on this journey alone. He never took into consideration the importance of communities or having a group around you. And thirdly, psychological factors. Not everyone in the global environment has or is in a position where they have equal resources. Now, we are in a society in the UK where education is free, for example. You can't say that for other parts of the world. Equally, we're in a society where technology is somewhat used frequently, and it's something which we have now digitally developed and adapted to through our education system. That isn't the same everywhere else. And so Like-Minded Females was created with the view that we could bridge that gap between a sense of community and using your mobile phone, and at the same time helping to develop life skills, social skills, and a sense of belonging. So this is my new hierarchy of needs, which at some point I'm sure I would go and propose to the social sciences platforms out there in the journals. My hierarchy of needs suggests that our psychological needs, yes, start at the same basis, but they are different, and they will always be different depending on where you've grown up, your cultural differences, your background, your demographic, even the amount that you earn, your parents earn, for example, will impact your needs. I then follow on to suggest that after that, technology comes first. Because like many of us, and through the stories that many of us face, we go into a world of technology even without learning how to use it. We are digital natives, but we are not mindful natives. We've never been taught how to mindfully use the digital system. And yet, my argument is that we can use technology as an avenue to go in and to find a sense of belonging, a sense of community and identity. Using technology as a facilitator and like a middleman where we can find the correct resources, the people, and most importantly, going to a place then where you are then not only finding a community, through that community you're finding identity and then confidence. 66% of the UK population suffer from a lack of confidence. That's even higher when you split it by gender. And confidence can mean in anything from imposter syndrome to actually just feeling low about yourself. So that's a whole different discussion. But ultimately, the segment is called Data Tells Me You're Lonely. And when you look at the data, it truly does tell me that we are a cohort of very lonely, isolated individuals. And yet, we are all the same cohort who are passionate, ready to drive change, to drive social impact, and to form a sense of identity both for ourselves and those who are around us. So currently there are 3 billion people online. Now that's a lot of people who you can connect with, who can connect with you, and who you can share your concerns with. The reason why such stats are also up here is because, yes, we're currently in a conference which is about big data and technology. But if you look at the recent studies and the research, in the next 5 years, the skill which will be the highest in demand by 6 times what it is today is emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence means self-awareness. It means being able to communicate. It means having a sense of empathy. And so it's awesome that we're in a place where we're trying to develop our technical skills and we're trying to be in the technical world. But ultimately, we have to just as much, if not more, focus on our communication skills, our community skills, and the skills which allow us to very much create those bonds with someone else and and drive our decision making and our power forward. I recently, so on Monday, I did a workshop for a university on professional skills. And when I looked into the top 10 skills which will be in demand in the next 5 to 10 years, it wasn't necessarily to become a coder or a BI analyst, because ultimately that's a job role. It was emotional intelligence, it was communication, it was empathy, it was self-awareness, it was resilience, and it was cognitive flexibility. So how can you adapt from one thing to another using the various elements of your brain? Quick quiz. You can just shout numbers out, honestly, if you want. Percentage. How many percent of the global population do you think are looking for a community? 17? Like 70. Okay. Wow, you're bang on. I should have some sweets or something, but I don't today. But for any winners, you can get free tickets to our upcoming event, so you can find me afterwards. How many are looking for connections? What was that, sorry? 40. Okay. Oh. 90%. 90% are looking for connections. And where's the first place they go? Online. 90% of us here in this room are looking for connections. So it's awesome to be in a place where we're connected together. And so we should definitely make the most of this opportunity. But it's also making sure that we take those connections outside of this cohort. Have the conversations, have the coffees, have the discussions, and see how we can truly help each other and be in a position where a community in a sense of belonging comes from us very much securing each other and sponsoring each other. 80% of opportunities come from connections and networking. That itself is quite a big stat to take in, to think that just knowing people can really get you your future opportunities and positions of influence. So now that we're online, what should we be doing? Well, we should definitely be connecting, we should be collaborating, and we should be finding our communities. Like-minded females is just one community out there. Maybe it's not the best for you. But firstly, it's connecting. It's connecting using the social devices we have. For example, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and making sure that we are very much connecting with the people around us and actively trying to create those connections and that sense of community. 2, it's collaborating. Now, there is definitely someone else in this room who is able to support you and sponsor you in your goal, your mission, and your vision next year going forward. It could be the person next to you. But having sat here, how many of you have started a conversation? Or it could be someone in this conference. Having been in this conference, how many of you have just gone and spoken to a stranger? I'm really proud of you. That's good. It's really not as daft as it sounds. If 90% are looking for connections, we just need that one person to really go out and be like, hey, how's it going? And then it's finding your community online. Your community can start from something you're passionate about, i.e. knitting, scarf making, baking, or it could be a community which is around more technical skills, so big data, AI, blockchain. And the best way of doing that is genuinely to Google or other search platforms which you may prefer. It's to go on social media platforms, and it's to ask people around you. By being online, you can find a sense of value and derive your value system. You go back online and you can be the person that you truly want to be, or play the persona of someone who is far more independent, far more confident, but in a state of belonging, and therefore try and reflect that in your personal and daily lives. By being online, you can find friends, just like I once did on MSN Messenger, just like I'm currently doing on Instagram. Some of my Instagram messages are now my closest friends, honestly. Same way as many of us are doing when we're dating on Tinder or Bumble, or just going on Quora, for example, and writing a review and following someone else and then having a conversation with them. It's a real opportunity to get out there and find friends. And by being online, you can be the best version of your future self. What is it you want to achieve this time in a month, in a year, in 10 years? And how can you start reflecting that future self throughout your online presence, throughout your online community, so that they can not only help you and drive that future self, but so you can have and start having the self-confidence that you can become that future self. So here's some of the social platforms that you can use to find a sense of community. Slack, LinkedIn, Mobilize, Eventbrite, Meetup. But also there's communities in gaming, for example, which is an industry by itself. And yet I know folks who have played games together through wireless connections and through interactions as you do, and then end up getting married. Not that everyone needs to get married, just as an example. So my challenge is to connect with one new person monthly, but being in this conference today, my challenge is to connect with at least 3 people. I have a 3-2-1 rule, which I think very much everyone could benefit from. It's in every setting, meet with 3 people, take 2 of those conversations back offline, online, and meet for coffee at least 1 person a month. So in a space of a year, you're meeting over 12 people in real time, face to face, learning about them, their vision, and seeing how you can support them and how they can support you. And again, having a sense of community and belonging. So that's 3-2-1. My challenge is, whilst you're here today, talk about the recent news, debate, share advice, raise the questions, give thanks and have thoughtful conversations so that you can create a sense of community and so that you feel less lonely. Because ultimately, lonely is also with disconnect and mental expectations. If you go in starting the conversation and have no expectations, the data will share otherwise. And I just want to leave you with one last thing. So as the 15-year-old girl that I once was, and my first time or second time on MSN Messenger, creating an online social platform and talking to people online, my mother wisely, very wisely told me that if you are old enough and responsible enough to have an online platform, online presence on an online platform, you are equally responsible enough to know who you are interacting with, which accounts you are following, and how that is affecting your mental health. So ultimately, the data tells us we're lonely. The data tells us that we look and are searching for community. The data tells us over 90% of us want to connect. But only you, through the power of the remote devices in your hand, your desktops, your computers, truly have the power to make that change and to get from a place of feeling quite low, lonely, and isolated to being in a sense of community, to being connected, and ultimately to being confident. Thank you.